My name is Jake Goshard. I'm one of the media relations officers here at the FBC. And I'm pleased to welcome John Kirby back to the Foreign Press Center. If the past is any guide, I believe today's briefing will be very useful and informative, as there are few better equipped to brief about the Biden-Harris administration's national security and foreign policy priorities than Mr. Kirby. Previously an assistant secretary and spokesperson at both the State Department and the Pentagon, in his current role at the National Security Council, Admiral Kirby coordinates interagency efforts to explain U.S. policy and is a senior administration representative on many vital global issues. A quick reminder of the ground rules today. The briefing is on the record. After his opening remarks, Admiral Kirby will be taking questions. If called for a question, please wait for the microphones and begin your question by stating your name, outlet, and country. And I want to note, we have identified a small number of pre-selected questions, pre-submitted questions, questions that were global or regional in nature, and they are invited to sit in the front row. We'll take those questions and then also many others from those in attendance. Admiral Kirby has graciously set aside enough time to answer several questions from throughout the room. In order to ensure we get as many people as possible, please maintain your professional decorum and speak your question when asked. The briefing will end promptly at 11:45. We will also post a video and transcript of the briefing afterwards on our website. And with that, I'm going to turn the briefing over to Mr. Kirby.
11:45. That's going to be a long briefing.
10:45.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be back. I just have a couple of comments at the top I want to make by way of update in terms of U.S. assistance to Turkey in the wake of those devastating earthquakes. I can report today that our two urban search and rescue teams are now on the ground, and they are moving into position out of Incirlik base. And these are two nearly 80-person search and rescue teams. Our disaster assistance response team is also setting up their base of operations in Incirlik, and they are beginning to coordinate needs with the government of Turkey. At the request of the government of Turkey, of course, USAID is looking to provide some support for field medical services. They're still in talks about that and what that could look like. USAID is also evaluating assistance to support both emerging housing, food, hygiene, and other needs as well. And of course, the Department of Defense is working closely with their counterparts in the Turkish government to identify any future capabilities that might be needed to support the response. I don't have anything to report specifically about military assets, but we're in constant contact with our Turkish counterparts on that. And as the President made clear, the United States will do anything and everything that we can to help the people of Turkey recover from these devastating earthquakes. As we all know that the casualties continue to climb as more people are found in rubble and in devastation. And so our thoughts and prayers go out to them, as well as to the people of Syria, who also suffered from these earthquakes. And we are working with U.S.-partnered humanitarian assistance groups to assist in Syria as well. As you know, we don't have a diplomatic footprint there, but we're doing everything we can through partnered groups and organizations to provide that kind of assistance. So, with that, I'll take some questions. Who wants to go first? You want to go? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the latest briefing and for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Omar Hashi. I work for the Maghreb Arab Press. My question is regarding the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit.
Yeah.
Once now the summit happened, is there any concrete action so far as follow-up on this commitment made during this summit, especially in the current geopolitical context of renewed interest and competition from major players in securing support and partnership with Africa?
Yeah, thanks for the question. As you know, even during the summit, President Biden announced that a new special envoy for implementation of the African Leaders Summit initiatives. His name is Johnny Carson, working out of the State Department. He's already been on the job since before the summit ended, and we are beginning to already put into place some of the obligations and commitments that nations made about climate, food security, energy security, and some other things. So there is work going on right now, and I will leave it to Mr. Carson to describe in greater detail. But the bottom line is, even before the summit ended, we had identified a known leader to take charge of our implementation program and put it into place. It was a robust few days there with the African Leaders Summit, and the president was grateful for the time that he had to spend with those leaders. And we all recognize that while there are certainly many challenges on the continent, there's also a lot of opportunity, and the United States means to be a significant partner. Yep. Ma'am.
I appreciate you do this for Foreign Press. And my name is Jim Myung Kim, and I'm with South Korea's Joseon Ilbo. And my question is about economic security policy. So recently, the U.S. and Japan and the Netherlands have agreed to limit the export of chips manufacturing equipment and technologies to China.
Yeah.
I want to know how the NSC coordinates with other U.S. government agencies and also U.S. Congress to form these economic security policies. Is there any mechanism or task force to cooperate with other agencies to make the U.S. policies consistent? And if you forgive me to add a new component to my question is, so last night, the President Biden said that supply chain begins in America, which is good, but it can be also understood as a little bit protective. And how does the U.S. allies and partners fit into this picture? Thank you.
I mean, both those questions are kind of related, aren't they? So I don't have any announcements to make with respect to any arrangement between the U.S., Japan, and the Netherlands. There were some good discussions last week, trilaterally. Certainly, supply chains, in particular microelectronic supply chains, were a part of that conversation, but so was an awful lot else, like the war in Ukraine and China's growing influence throughout the Indo-Pacific and around the world. So there's a lot on the agenda. So I don't have anything to speak too specifically with that, but I can tell you that we're going to, and this kind of gets to your second question, we're going to continue to work with allies and partners around the world to help build more resilient supply chains. And as the president noted last night, that certainly has to start here. We got to do it too. And in the president's view, this has got to be a whole of government effort for the U.S. federal government. It can't just be owned by any one agency. We all have a hand in this, whether it's the Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, the Department of Energy. So there's a lot of work to be done. I would tell you the Department of Commerce will continue to lead the charge on our export controls. And all departments and agencies across the U.S. government are involved in that process as well. So it's a real team approach under President Biden, and we're going to continue that. And that team approach includes not just intra-U.S. government, but our efforts with allies and partners around the world. I think we all saw throughout the pandemic how fragile in some cases supply chains can be. And the president's committed to making sure that we shore that up and make them more resilient, more viable, particularly in times of crisis. Who else? Go ahead.
John, Alex Raffol from Tran News. First of all, welcome back. Having been long enough part of the FPC, I do recognize the significance of your coming back in a couple of months. So please keep them coming. It's significant. Two quick questions. One is about Ukraine. As you know, we are approaching the first year anniversary of Putin's invasion.
Yeah.
And there is no sign of Putin coming back to the table. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it time for the U.S. to evolve from providing Ukraine with the weapons that it needs to hold the line to actually win the war? And as you know what I'm talking about, jets that Ukraine has been asking for a long time. Secondly, on Armenia, Azerbaijan, your boss, Jake Sullivan, has been involved into the peace process, but tension has been evolving. I'm just wondering if you guys are running out of tools, if there's anything you can do at this point to move the needles. Thanks so much.
Yeah, let me take the second one first, and I'll get to Ukraine. I mean, you rightly noted that Mr. Sullivan has had conversations with his counterpart. Secretary Blinken has been involved, of course. I mean, we're all mindful of the tensions there, and while we're focused on urging the parties to return to negotiations, we are also calling for the restoration of commercial traffic to the Lakin corridor. And I think you may not know, maybe you do, we just named now a senior advisor for Caucasus negotiations, Mr. Louis Bono. And so we're going to remain engaged largely through his offices, but certainly at all levels that are appropriate. But we want to see the tensions decrease. We want to see both sides go back to the negotiating table. That's important. On Ukraine, I wish I could tell you you're wrong. I would love nothing better, honestly, today, than to be able to say Mr. Putin has decided to give up his war in Ukraine and pull his troops out as they should be pulled out and end this brutal invasion. Sadly, we can't do that. He has shown no indication of being willing to negotiate, in good faith or not, negotiate at all. In fact, quite the opposite. He continues to show a lust for more bloodshed and a desire to visit war on more Ukrainians in more places. And this is not just, continued air attacks on their on infrastructure, energy, and water, but also attacks, particularly in the Donbass, on places like Bakhmut and Soledar. Bakhmut, there's still vicious fighting going on. So everything we see out of the Kremlin tells us that Mr. Putin wants to continue to fight this war, which is why we're going to do what we can, not just the United States, but nations around the world, to support Ukraine and their ability to succeed on the battlefield. Now, yeah, that has a lot to do with weapons and systems, and I'll get to your question about that in a second, but it also has to do with financial assistance as well, making sure that Ukraine can still govern itself, that they have the resources to keep paying government employers and keep hospitals open and schools open. So there's a lot of work being done to help support Ukraine, and you heard the president talk about this last night. We're going to continue to do that for as long as it takes. Now, what kind of systems are coming in the future? I'm obviously not going to get ahead of decisions. I mean, we just announced another package a week or so ago that included some longer range capability for these HIMARS that the Ukrainians are using, as well as artillery ammunition, small arms and ammunition, more vehicles, and we're going to continue to do that going forward. You can hardly blame the Ukrainians for wanting more, given what they're facing every day. We understand that, and that's why we're in constant communication with them almost every day about what the capabilities are, what the needs on the battlefield are, and we've evolved that over time. When the war first started and Ukrainian tanks and columns were moving on Kyiv, it was Javelin anti-tank missiles that they needed the most, and we were trying to get them to them in a hurry, and Stinger air defense missiles. And as the war changed, it became more about long-range fires and artillery pieces, howitzers, the HIMARS. Then it became more about air defense because of what Putin's been doing with Iranian drones and cruise missiles. Air defense is still a significant capability. And now, as the Ukrainians prepare for what will likely be more fighting in the spring when the weather improves, and I won't get ahead of Ukrainian plans, but as they prepare, they've identified that they need to get better at something called combined arms maneuver. This is the ability to take large units and maneuver them and fight effectively across open terrain, oftentimes open terrain. And that's why the Department of Defense is doing battalion-level training outside of Ukraine, so that they can get better at this combined arms maneuver and those kinds of operations. And it's why we have, in the last few support packages, included armored vehicles like Bradleys and Strykers. And it's why our allies and partners who have done the same, providing additional armored vehicles so that they can perform better and more effectively come spring when the weather improves. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Caroline, all right? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Well, you keep on saying, and President Biden said it yesterday, that you are going to support Ukraine, the U.S. is going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But is it also with everything it takes? You have been listing now a couple of things. You have been supporting Ukraine financially, but they want F-16 fighters. Is the United States going to send F-16 fighters?
I'm just simply not going to get ahead of any announcements of future security assistance. Yes, the Ukrainians have made clear that they want some advanced capabilities. They've talked about fighter aircraft. We're going to continue to talk with them, again, in real time about capabilities and what can be provided. But what can be provided by the U.S., what can be provided by allies and partners.
Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead. After I get through the first row here, we'll work back there. Yeah.
Thank you. So Cristobal Vasquez, France 24 in Spanish. So the Chinese influence in Latin America has been growing. I think right now is the largest trading partner of every country except Colombia. Do you guys think it's too late for the U.S. to catch up, considering that growing influence? And concerning Lula's visit to the U.S., Is there any specifics you can share with us about perhaps any additional help, additional financial help to the Amazon Fund, and other details about Lula's agenda here in DC?
So let me take the second one first. We'll have more detail later this week about President Lula's visit on Friday. We're looking forward to that. I think you can imagine there'll be a wide range of issues to be discussed between President Lula and President Biden, not just regional, certainly not just issues in Brazil, but hemispheric issues as well as global issues, because the war in Ukraine is affecting everybody. And that's going to lead me to your first question. But anyway, we're looking forward to President Lula coming and having a robust discussion with him. And we'll have more to say about the agenda as we get closer. And certainly we'll have an ability to characterize the visit for you after the fact. But on the agenda, I think you can imagine, will be the war in Ukraine, because it has had an effect around the world. Food security and energy security are two of the biggest ways in which Putin's war has affected nations all over the world, and it's had a profound impact, particularly in Latin America as well as throughout the African continent. The Russians would have you believe, as Mr. Lavrov likes to say, that this is a war started by the West, and it's the West's fault that places throughout the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America, are having issues with energy and food security, which is farcical. It would be a laughable comment if it wasn't so serious, the impact that it's having. It's Mr. Putin's decision it was his decision to conduct this war, to make this invasion, and it's because of that decision that energy and food security have been so drastically affected over recent months, and affecting particularly low and middle income countries, which is why President Biden worked so closely with the G7 to put in place a price cap on Russian oil, not to take it off the market, but to make sure that Mr. Putin could limit his profiteering ability so that he couldn't use all those revenues off of oil to fund weapons programs and keep his soldiers in the field conducting atrocities against the Ukrainian people. And it's why it was so important for us to have the African Leaders Summit and to bring leaders together through the continent so that we could talk about things like energy and food security. Now, you said something about the Chinese and the influence in Latin America and whether we can catch up. And I would just take issue with that. I mean, you make it sound like, we're on our back feet. We have worked closely with our Western Hemisphere partners on many issues. Just yesterday, the Vice President held a conference of sorts to talk about her call to action and the work that we're doing to get at the root causes of migration throughout the hemisphere. We are seeing historic movements of people. Not since World War II have we seen this many people on the move, and a lot of it's coming in the Western Hemisphere. And yes, the Chinese want to take advantage of that. And they roll into places with empty promises and high interest loans, and they don't care what they leave in their wake. That's not the way the United States does business. We work in partnership with our friends and our allies around the world, and that's going to continue in certainly in Latin America as well. We all have shared threats. We all have shared challenges. We all have shared opportunities, and that's what we're working on. That's what we're focused on. But I would take issue with the fact that we need to catch up. I'll tell you what is catching up. The Chinese reputation for self-interest and selfishness and exploitation, that narrative is catching up to the rest of the world. Yeah, in the back there. Go ahead. Yeah, you. Yeah, you with the coat and the beard.
First of all, thank you so much. You start with Turkey. So
Yeah, who you with?
Anil Sural from Turkey,
Okay.
Vatan newspaper. Thank you so much doing this.
Yeah.
So you're
Seriously, our condolences.
foreign journalist friendly. I know you from Pentagon. Thank you so much. So two teams have arrived in Turkey, and they are almost 200 rescue team. What kind of help do you plan or do you intend from now on? Have you ever contacted a Turkish official about matter directly? The most important thing right now is
Before you go on, have we contacted them about what directly?
the earthquake.
Oh, the earthquake. Okay.
Yeah. The most important thing right now is humanitarian, help. Tens of thousands of people need to rescue,
Yeah.
As you say, they're under the things.
Yeah.
But it should be as soon as possible. I know, thank you so much, the United States and some of the country of the world directly, they immediately help. I know from the Fairfax and the Los Angeles, but definitely need more people because maybe a couple days later, I'm sure it will be tons of food, medical. It will not be no problem because I was in Sakarya, Turkish earthquake, 1990, but it should be more rescue team. What is your plan about it, near future?
How's your family? Your family okay over there?
Thank you, they're good, but most of my friends, 13 million people east of Turkey. I have friends, when I contact first,
Are they okay?
most of them okay, but it's hard to say we're okay because I'm shy when I drink water.
Sure that even those who were not physically affected are.
Yeah, the psychologically even is it affected.
So look, I mean, I tried to talk about this at the opening. I hope you didn't miss the way I ended my opening, which is to say that we are going to stay in close contact with our counterparts in Turkey to make sure that we are communicating every day about what their needs are, what they want, and what we can provide. But President Biden began to lean forward as soon as the news broke. He wanted his team leaning forward, not waiting necessarily to be asked, but making sure that we had in place and that we alerted agencies and organizations to lean ahead. Obviously, you have to do that in lockstep with Turkey. They get to decide who comes in to support aid and assistance. We respect that, but we wanted to make sure that in anticipation of requests that we were leaning forward, and we did that. And we're going to continue to do that. So I can't tell you right now how much more aid and assistance the United States is going to provide because we have to work that out in real time with the government of Turkey and President Erdogan and what his needs are. What I can promise you is that the United States will continue to have those conversations and will continue to lean forward and be as ready as we can to support with as much as we can, obviously in lockstep with the government of Turkey. But we understand.
Thank you.
We know the devastation, and again, our hearts and thoughts.
Zoom with Turkey 2 days ago. Thank you.
Yeah, I can tell you we're going to stay at this, and we're going to do everything that we can to support the victims of these devastating earthquakes. Turkey's not just a good friend, but they're a NATO ally, and we take that very, very seriously. Yeah, ma'am. I'm going to see how much I can get the microphone person to run all around.
I had another question about China and Latin America, about the balloon that was detected flying over Latin America.
Yeah.
What kind of communication has the United States has had with partners in the region in the last few days? What is your assessment of that balloon, if it poses a threat to partners in the region? And it was seen flying over the Atlantic coast in Colombia. There are military bases there, and the U.S. is a huge partner for Colombia in security assistance. Are you worried about security theft? What is your assessment on this? Thank you.
Well, out there, isn't there? What I can tell you is that we're going to be reaching out to allies and partners all over the world who we believe need to know more about this Chinese spy balloon program. And I think you're going to hear more from us later today about that. So I don't want to get ahead of conversations, but we are going to be making sure that our allies and partners around the world have the same sort of context about this program that we do. I can't speak for the track of this particular balloon. We did acknowledge that there was a second one flying over parts of the hemisphere south of us. We did not assess that balloon was a physical military threat any more than the one that was flying over the continental United States. And obviously, we routinely take appropriate action to preserve our own informational and physical security in situations like this, just like we did last week. But I won't get into more detail about what that looks like. But again, we're we're having conversations with our allies and partners so that they understand the same context that we have now about this spy balloon program by China. We are certainly not the only nation in the world that has been overflown by these balloons, and we're going to be sharing some of that context. But again, I'll reserve additional comment until later today when I think we'll have more to say about that. Does that help? Yeah. Yeah, in the back there. Yes, sir. You with the glasses?
This gentleman?
Yeah. Yeah. You're the only one with glasses on.
I had to look around. Thanks, Nirmal Ghosh from the Straits Times of Singapore. I'm wondering if you could give us a bit of a rundown on the state and level of US-China military-to-military dialogues, meetings, contacts, and so forth, which apparently were there prior to August last year, then were suspended, then the two presidents met, and so forth. What is happening now on that level? Thank you.
Unfortunately, not a lot. One of the purposes of Secretary Blinken's planned travel to Beijing, was to try to work out a resumption of those communication vehicles. There was bilateral climate conferences that got suspended. So the whole coming out of Bali, both presidents agreed, let's see if we can move this relationship forward in a better direction, and let's start by having our teams get together and see if we can't restore some of those communication vehicles. And you're right, the military to military was one of them. We think it's important for those vehicles to be open, and we continue to seek open lines of communication with China, because without those lines, misunderstandings can lead to miscalculations, and nobody wants to see that. And the military to military channel is a particularly important one when it comes to reducing the risk of miscommunication and miscalculation, reducing the risk of some kind of conflict. So it's very important to get those channels back open again, but obviously now's not the appropriate time to have those discussions. Now's not the appropriate time for Secretary Blinken, as he said himself, to travel to Beijing. So unfortunately, not a lot of movement has been taken on those particular lines of communication. We seek competition with China, not conflict. You heard the president talk about that last night. Nothing has changed about that. And as the president said last night, we believe we're in a really good position to compete. Strong economy, jobs coming back, actually roaring back here in the United States. We have got terrific programs for innovation, terrific private-public partnerships with respect to high tech. And the United States, he believes, is poised to compete quite well in this competition. But that's how we look at it. A strategic competition. We don't seek any conflict with China. Yeah, you in the red sweater there.
Red sweater? Oh.
Go ahead. Yeah, you. Oh, this guy, yeah, that right there. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's only two red sweaters that I see, and the other guy's in the front. So.
Thank you so much. My name is Diyar Kurda.
Your name is who?
Diyar Kurda. I'm Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for Rudaw Media Network, Kurdistan region of Iraq. Today, a delegation by the Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister to arrive in Washington, D.C., and they're going to have a meeting with Secretary Blinken, and also they're going to have a meeting with some people in the White House. Before they visiting D.C., the Iraqi Foreign Minister, when he had a meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister, he said that we're going to discuss with the U.S. how to pay the Russian energy firms. What he said, I quote him,
how to what?
We are going to discuss with the U.S. partners how to pay Russian energy firms, companies. He said, we will discuss this problem with the American side because there are sanctions, but the sanctions should not be imposed in Iraq because there are still ongoing cooperation between Iraq and Russia, and also there are still active Russian oil companies in Iraq. Are you willing to waive Iraq on the Russian sanctions in any circumstance?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the State Department.
And my second question, on the continued cash flow from the Federal Reserve transfer. I know you took some restrictions, but there are still concerns that there are still dollar cash flow from Iraq to Iran and also elsewhere. Then how the national security address the continued dollar cash flow from Federal Reserve transfer? How will the U.S. ensure that the central bank of Iraq has the capacity to strongly monitor and enforce the new rules?
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I'm going to take that question because I am probably not the best person to talk to about that. So we'll have my staff take that question for you, and we'll see if we can get you a good answer. Simon, go ahead, buddy.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby, for finally giving me a question after 6 months. I know I know the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, yourself, and your office have been discriminating against me, and I've said it at the White House. Even during the U.S.-Africa Summit, you did not take questions from Africans in the briefing room and even in the background call. So I thank you for giving me a question. I want to ask you if you are just lying to the American people. When you were asked at a press conference a few days ago about the Chinese balloon, you were asked to give details. You said there were previous incursions in U.S. airspace when President Trump was in power. You were asked to provide evidence. When, how long did they last? And you did not provide those evidence. So the question many people are asking, especially on the right, are you just lying to the American people?
So, Simon, we, after coming into office and beginning to study and learn more about the Chinese spy program, balloon program, we did the responsible thing in trying to learn more about it, and that's to do some forensics and looking retroactively about how they operated these balloons. And in doing that work, we discovered that on at least 3 occasions that we know of, there were brief incursions into U.S. airspace in previous years before we took office. What I can tell you is we have offered briefings to some key officials from the Trump administration so that they can come in and see the forensic work that we did, the evaluation and the analysis that we did, and they can see it for themselves. I'm not going to get ahead of those briefings. I'm certainly not going to detail them here. We're still talking about some classified information. And I'm certainly not going to, again, get ahead of the discussions that we are willing to have with key officials from the Trump administration. But don't miss the forest for the trees here. It's not just about 1 or 2 or 3 brief incursions into U.S. airspace in years prior. In some way, it's not even just about the incursion into our airspace last week. It's about a concerted effort by the Chinese to develop this sort of capability, which provides them additional surveillance assets over countries without their permission and sometimes without their knowledge. And that's why today we're going to be discussing this with some of our allies and partners around the world so that they can get a sense of what we have come to learn about this spy balloon program. Let's go over to this side. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Oh, you're not a ma'am. She's a ma'am.
Thank you. I am the ma'am. Hi, my name is Yang Soon Kim from KBS, Korean Broadcasting System, South Korea. You're going to tell more detail afterward about the spy balloon, but I'm going to asking that the Chinese spy balloon had it detected in 5 continents and mostly everywhere, but is the South Korea included in way or either South Korea
Nice
or
try.
Korea?
Nice try. I'm not going to get ahead of individual conversations
Chinese
we're having.
spy balloons in the Chinese Taiwan Strait and Japan and most of the Taiwan areas, so we are very curious.
I'm sure you are, but we're going to reserve those conversations with our allies and partners privately, and they can choose how they want to characterize it. But again, to Simon's question, don't lose the larger story here, which is that this is a program that the Chinese have been working on for several years. They have been trying to improve it and grow it and increase it, and to gain intelligence insight from it. And the United States is not the only nation that has been affected by this. And we think it's important for our allies and partners to also, be made aware. But again, we'll have more to say about this later today. I don't want to get ahead of those conversations. Okay. Let's see, way in the back there. Go ahead, you on the aisle there. Yeah, with the gray jacket. There you go. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. My question related to the FMF program toward Taiwan. Is there any development to share? Has the U.S. and Taiwan had discussions since President Biden signed the spending bill? And if I may, what kind of defense capability should Taiwan enhance in the U.S. view, given the rising threat from China? Will it apply to FMF program? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any specific conversations to read out today or talk about any future FMF deals with Taiwan. We just very recently agreed to, I think it was $1 billion worth of FMF not too long ago. And we take those responsibilities to help Taiwan with its self-defense very, very seriously. All governed by the Taiwan Relations Act and, of course, the One China policy. And we've had terrific bipartisan support in Congress for 30 plus years on supporting Taiwan's self-defense needs. We'll continue to do that. I don't have any specific articles to talk to today, but I can assure you that these are conversations that we continually have with Taiwan about their self-defense needs and what capabilities might be most appropriate for them, given their own self-defense requirements. So I really don't have more to say than that. Yeah, let me go over here to this side, way in the back there, black sleeve. There you go.
Thank you, sir. Johanna Roth, Zeit Online, Germany. Yesterday, the Washington Post published a story regarding the size of this Chinese surveillance operation. I was wondering to what extent that came as a surprise to the government. Maybe you can elaborate on this.
Whether we were surprised by the Washington Post story or surprised by the, because we often are surprised by the Washington Post. Just kidding. I'm not gonna. I think I've said about as much on this as I can today. We are going to have conversations with allies and partners about this program and about what we've learned, and I think I need to leave it at that. You'll hear more from us later today on that. Sorry, I wish I could help more. Yeah, you go in the gray jacket there.
Thank you. I'm Augustinas from Lithuania, public broadcaster. I wanted to ask, could you preview for a bit what decisions can be realistically expected this year NATO summit in Lithuania? For example, do you think that it's realistic to expect for NATO to somehow more specifically define its future relationship with Ukraine, for example, compared to 2008 summit in Bucharest, which was famously vague, and for example, if
famously vague,
yeah, there was a promise that Ukraine will be
famously vague. That sounds like the title of my autobiography. I like that.
Yeah,
I just sorry, it just stuck in my head.
Sure.
But I'm sorry, I completely blew up the question.
Is it possible? Is it also realistic to expect that Baltic countries that there's going to be some solution to bolster air defenses of Baltic countries? And do you think that new defense plans of eastern flank of NATO will be confirmed in the summit as well? Thank you.
There's not a lot I can do to answer those questions specifically. I certainly won't speak for the alliance. Secretary General Stoltenberg is in D.C. today. He'll be meeting with Secretary Austin at the Pentagon as well as Secretary Blinken. I believe that Secretary Blinken and Secretary General Stoltenberg will be doing a press conference today. So I think better to let him speak to his plans for the upcoming summit. Let me just, if I could, this won't satisfy your questions, but I think it's an important thing to point out a couple of things. One, NATO has never been more united than it is now, or nor more resolved to meet its obligations to itself and to its members. and that includes our allies in the Baltic region, who we recognize have a huge stake in what's going on, particularly right now, and have been terrific supporters of Ukraine, in many ways punching well above their weight. And we respect that, and we're grateful for that. One of the things that we in the United States made clear from the very beginning of this war was that we take our Article 5 commitments very, very seriously. And Secretary of Defense Austin, under President Biden's order, put more American troops on the European continent to shore up the eastern flank of NATO, something to the order of 20,000. And he has now put in place an ability to keep that extra 20,000 on the continent in a rotational basis. So we are making it very clear our commitments, and that does include some additional air defense. I mean, we moved some aircraft around. We devoted more aircraft to NATO airspace to make sure that that we send a strong signal to Mr. Putin that NATO airspace is NATO space, and we took that seriously. And other nations, certainly along the eastern flank, but elsewhere throughout the alliance, have done the same, and we're grateful for that. What's going to come out of the summit? Again, I don't know, and certainly would encourage you to ask that question of Mr. Stoltenberg today. He's much better positioned to answer that. But from our perspective, we believe that the alliance, again, more united, more resolved, more relevant now than it's ever been. And the United States remains committed. President Biden remains committed to doing everything we can to continue to make that we're contributing and shoring up, particularly the eastern flank of the alliance. And on defense spending, you continue to see now, particularly in the wake of Mr. Putin's war, many nations working harder to get to that 2% pledge. And we're glad to see that, and we continue to encourage it. I cannot speak to the president's travel at this time. Go back over to this side. Yes, sir. Nope, over here. Oh, sorry. I'll go to you, and then.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning.
I'll go to you. I'll get you in a second. He already stood up, so it's all right. I got time. It's fine. Go ahead.
Kazubayev Rustem, International News Agency Kazinform from Kazakhstan. My question about the United States strategy for Central Asia. I would like to ask, are the United States considering correction their strategy for Central Asia in the context of the changing geopolitical situation? And if so, what changes can be expected? What are the prospects for adopting a new strategy for Central Asia, given the fact that the current one was adopted during the United States presence in Afghanistan? Thank you very much.
Can you just the first question you asked?
The first question about United States considering correction.
Correction.
Yes, the strategy for Central Asia.
Well, there's a lot there, and I certainly would refer you to my colleagues at the State Department who speak to this with much more clarity than me. We have been grateful to Central Asian countries for the support many of them helped provide us while we were fighting in Afghanistan, and we continue to stay closely linked and in conversation with many of those countries, particularly now that we are not in Afghanistan, and recognizing that recognize a continued credible threat by groups like ISIS in the region. I don't know of that our strategy, as you put it, is being rewritten or needs to be rewritten. Again, I'd refer you to the State Department on that. All I'd say is that we recognize the importance of Central Asia on so many levels. I talked about terrorism, but it's beyond that, of course. Energy security, food security, climate change. There's an awful lot on the agenda with Central Asian states, but again, I don't know of any shifts that are coming. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Tom Watkins with The National. Just since you've been speaking, Prime Minister Sunak's spokesman has said that Britain is indeed considering sending fighter jets to Ukraine. It remains to be seen, obviously, if they will. Does that change US posture at all, given what we saw with the tanks? There was kind of this steady drip of like, well, we're going to do it, well, we're not unless you do. If Britain does step up and begin sending jets, would that change the US position at all?
Again, I don't want to engage in a hypothetical or speculate about future security assistance that the U.S. would provide from the very beginning. And by the way, we're very grateful for everything the United Kingdom has done to support Ukraine. They've been very active, very energetic, and terrific partners as always. And I certainly can't confirm these reports. I'm just hearing about it for the first time. But from the very beginning, we've made clear, and it has been an idea reinforced through these Ukraine contact groups that Secretary Austin has put in place, I think 8 now, that these are sovereign decisions that nations make, and we respect that. Every nation has to decide for itself what it's willing to provide Ukraine and under what circumstances, because every nation has their own national security interests to think about and their own alliances to measure up to. So they're all sovereign decisions. We respect that. We certainly have not been twisting arms one way or the other. What we have been actively talking to allies and partners about what kinds of capabilities they can provide, and again, under what circumstances. It is clear that Ukraine is going to continue to need support, as you heard the president talk about last night, for quite some time into the future, because it is very clear that Mr. Putin is not willing to end this war, and that as the weather improves, their needs will evolve and change. I can't get ahead of where we are now. Every time we announce a security assistance package, you hear directly from me. We lay it out there in the public, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. I was going to ask a two-pronger, but you kind of answered my initial question.
Well, go ahead, shoot it anyway. We'll see if you did. What's the second one?
part was actually back on China. You said that the US seeks competition with China, not conflict. Do you despair whenever a general or an admiral comes out and says that they're ramping up for some sort of kinetic action by 2025, 2027? What's the disconnect there?
We and you heard Secretary Austin talk about this. We don't believe that conflict is inevitable. And frankly, there's no reason for it to come to that. Now, individual military leaders, can speak for themselves, but our view is that conflict is not inevitable, and certainly not on that particular timeline. We know that President Xi has said that he wants his military poised and ready by 2027, if for that kind of eventuality. But our sense is that there's no reason for it to come to that. Nothing's changed about our one China policy. We don't support Taiwan independence. We do support their ability to defend themselves. Nothing's changed about that. What we seek is, again, a strategic competition, not a conflict. And because we've not changed our policy with respect to one China, there should be no reason for it to come to that. So you talked about a disconnect. I guess I would take issue with that. We have been nothing but consistent and nothing but clear. President Biden has repeatedly, on many occasions, talked about his adherence and continued belief in a one China policy. Yeah. I'll take just a couple more and then I'm going to have to go. Go ahead. You've been quite vigorous over there.
Thank you, Admiral Kirui, for doing this. This is Mushfiqul Fazal, working for Just News BD and South Asia Perspectives. From the beginning, the U.S. is urging for a genuine and credible election in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
But with this call, we experienced already 2 farcical elections in 2014 and 2018. The regional 2 big neighbors like India and China are very much supportive to the current authoritarian Prime Minister Hasina, and we have seen how Indian authority played their role in last 2 elections to keep current Prime Minister in power by any means. Now another election is coming and people are demanding a genuine election. like US under a neutral caretaker administration. Do you think India will be with you this time at least for upholding democratic rights in Bangladesh as you have developed your engagement in this regard? Thank you very much.
I certainly can't speak for India. We wouldn't presume to do that. I can only speak for the United States. And we absolutely look forward to deepening our engagement with Bangladesh. Our cooperation on climate change, development, the economy, humanitarian assistance, security, all that shows the full range of our strong partnership and the future potential of that partnership. We support an inclusive, democratic Bangladesh in which all Bangladeshis can thrive, a prosperous future which will also be built on stronger democratic institutions and the participation of all Bangladeshis in elections and governance of their country. Free and fair elections are everyone's responsibility. That includes voters, political parties, youth wings, police, and those free and fair elections cannot take place in an environment where there's political violence. Okay, I take one more and then I got to get going. Gosh, I don't know who to do. In the back there, yeah, thank you.
Cool, thank you. Last question. The president said yesterday at the State of the Union that he doesn't have to apologize for investing in America. So what does this mean for the ongoing negotiations with the European Union on the Inflation Reduction Act? Is there still room for some exemptions until March?
Well, I won't speak about specific outcomes here. As you know, the president stood up a task force specifically designed to work with our EU partners on supply chains and trade, and to also provide a venue for them to share with us their concerns about the IRA and for us to walk them through our implementation plans for the IRA. So that task force is up and running. Those conversations are happening. You heard the president last night. I mean, he obviously believes strongly in investing here in our economy. Because he knows that a strong American economy has reverberations around the world. But that obviously we, as he said when President Macron was here, we're certainly interested in learning more about what European concerns are and willing to talk about those and to consider those concerns. And that dialogue remains open, and it will remain open going forward. Again, I just don't have any specific outcomes or exemptions or waivers to speak to today. Okay, listen, I almost did a full hour. Thanks very much. Unfortunately, I got to get going, but I appreciate this. And if it's okay, I'll come back again sometime soon. Go ahead.
President Lula is coming here on Friday. He has a position on neutrality when it comes to the war. How does the U.S. government see this neutrality, and what will President Biden say and do to push Lula to go harder on Ukraine?
Look, this gets almost exactly to the question I just answered. These are sovereign decisions that nations have to make, and we respect that. We don't believe, I can only speak for us, we don't believe that this is the time for business as usual with Russia. They are killing thousands upon thousands of Ukrainians, innocent people that pose no threat to Russia, none. He moved across that border almost a year ago with no provocation and no excuse. And millions have been flung into refuge inside their country and outside their country. It is utterly despicable what Mr. Putin has been doing for almost a year now inside Ukraine. And we believe that there is terrific international community unity about holding him accountable. I mean, at the UN not long ago, 143 nations voted to condemn his political annexations of areas in the south and the east of Ukraine. And as I said, more than 50 nations are showing up every time Secretary Austin gets one of these contact groups together. But in the context of the UN and in the context of those contact groups, every nation votes for itself. Every nation decides for itself, and that's important. I mean, it's kind of ironic, isn't it, your question? The whole issue at play right now in Ukraine, aside from obviously the death and destruction, but the larger issue at play is one of sovereignty. It's one of independence. It's one of the people of that country having a vote and having a say in their future and determining it for themselves. Well, wouldn't it be deeply ironic and unfortunate if the United States was willing to trample on that very idea in order to pursue the policies that we are pursuing or try to force others to pursue? I mean, we wouldn't do that. We couldn't do that. It is all about sovereign space, sovereign decision making, the sovereign will of a people of a country. That's what we're standing up for. And so President Lula, democratically elected by the people of Brazil, he has to speak for them. He has to decide in accordance with the strength of his own democratic institutions, and we respect that. President's very much looking forward to this visit, and I'm sure that the war in Ukraine will be a part of it, but there'll be a lot of other issues on the agenda too. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. You bet.